Hi guys, in this video I'm going to take a look at one of my chess games from a very long time ago, all the way back in 1995. But it's probably one of my one of the first games I played which I was really quite happy with. And it was a game that I played in the Collardale Evening League against a guy called Brian Sharp, who at the time was probably a little bit higher rated than me. In this game, I probably will divulge and talk a lot about the opening. That's probably where my strength is. I normally always get a good position out of the opening and then tend to cock up a little bit later on. Not always, but quite a lot of the time. So, Brian played 1e4. And at this moment in my sort of very early chess career, I played c5 because of the influence of Kasparov and his games against Karpov and Short in the World Championship matches. So I really liked how Kasparov handled them positions, and I liked them positions, so I always played c5. Obviously, White's got a multitude of options here. Knight f3 is probably the main option, which was played by my opponent Brian. Obviously, after knight c3, knight c6, we've got the close Sicilian or the Grand Prix attack, and obviously I think bishop b5 is also possible here as well. But after knight f3, which is probably the main move, I played d6, one of a number of options. I tend to play e6 more these days, angling for sort of Tamenov or cam positions. Obviously knight c6 is an option. After d4, pawn takes, knight takes, we've got the popular Sveshnikov or even the Kalashnikov with 4e5, or potentially something like the accelerated dragon. But I played d6 because of the influence of Kasparov. d4 is the open Sicilian, and it was what was played by Brian in the game. Bishop b5 probably being the main sideline. c3 obviously is another option as well. Brian played d4. Black nearly always takes on d4, and Brian took back with the knight. Obviously taking back the queen is absolutely fine as well. Black nearly always responds with knight f6, attacking the e4 pawn, at which point Brian defended it the most natural way with knight c3. And now Black's at a crossroads. I played a6, again from the influence of Kasparov in his games with Karpov and Short in the World Championship. g6 is also an option, which instigates the dragon, which I've played many times as both colours. Same with knight c6, the classical, which I've played many times. And then obviously e6, which is the Scheveningen, which I pronounced incorrectly, I'm sure, because I'm not from the Netherlands. Not very popular these days. g4, the Keres attack, is quite tough to handle for Black. Playable for Black, I'm sure, but practically this gives White a really good attack. And I've played this as White and tend to get some quite good attacking positions. After a6, White has a multitude of options. Brian in the game played f4, which is one of the main sixth moves. Bishop g5 is the old main line, where Black usually responds with e6, or knight d7 is an option as well. Bishop e2 is a move that kind of will never go out of fashion, will always be a good move. Black then usually responds with either e5 or e6, or even possibly g6 as well. Bishop c4 was the move played by Fischer back in the day, in the sort of 60s, 70s, at which point Black usually plays e6 to blunt the diagonal. A move that I have faced quite a lot, sort of more recently playing the Najdorf, was h3, which was played by Andrew Clarkson, who plays in the Calderdale and Lancashire leagues. He's a great he's a great fan of this. But I've also faced players such as Malcolm Corbett, who plays in the Calderdale League, where black usually responds with e5, but obviously e6 is also an option as well. Back to the game. Brian played f4. I responded then with queen c7, which is a move that was recommended by Danny King's old Winning with a Najdorf book, which was probably one of the first chess books I ever, opening chess books at least, I ever looked at, which I got from the library, which I now do own an old copy that I got from the internet. Obviously e5 would be the traditional Najdorf move, which is recommended in many sort of opening books, but was actually discouraged by Danny King. E6 is obviously always an option as well, which is again transposing back to a Scheveningen. But I played queen c7. Brian now played bishop e2, which now really transposes back into positions that you'd find in a 6 bishop e2 variation there after black plays e6. But after bishop e2, I then did play e6. Obviously e5 would be a mainline Najdorf. But back in the day, I tended to prefer Scheveningen over Najdorf positions, again, primarily due to the influence of Kasparov in his games with Karpov in the World Championship matches. Brian now responded by castling, which is absolutely fine, probably the best move. And I would just continue with the kingside development with bishop e7. Again, white can play lots and lots of moves here. Bishop e3 is an option. Brian actually played a4, which is absolutely fine, stopping black from expanding on the queen side b5. Bishop e3 is probably the most common move, but a4 can be always played later on. So Brian played a4, at which point I played knight c6. Obviously castling here would be absolutely fine as well. Now Brian played a very unusual move, and not one that I'd kind of seen before at the time. Now Brian must have been afraid that I was going to take on d4, because he now dropped his knight back to f3. Probably not the best. I think in knight b3 would possibly be a better move here. The main line is obviously it's bishop e3, when after castles, white then has two sort of options. One of them is being king h1, which I've played as white quite a few times. Another one would be something like queen e1, where black would usually do this sort of taking on d4 and then play e5. And for example, this was played, I was played this as black. This is a very sort of big main line, and I played this as black against a guy called Mark Howitt in the Woodhouse Cup back in 2004, and this is one of the main sort of tabias of this Scheveningen position. As I said, king h1 is another one where rook e8 would reach a position was played in lots and lots of Kasparov-Karpov World Championship games, and lots of Kasparov Anand World Championship games, where white usually in this position plays either bishop f3 or bishop d3. After king h1, I think I've had games where black's played bishop d7, say knight b3, and this occasion I played this as white against something called Granville Boot in the Huddersfield League back in 2012. So I have had a lot of experience with these sort of positions, and they are very, very interesting to look at. Brian played this unusual knight f3 move, and at which point I just couldn't really refute it straight away, so I just castled. Brian then played king h1, which again gets his king out of the dangerous a1h, g1 a7 diagonal. Again, I'm going to develop the last piece, and that's the bishop on c8. b6 looks to develop the bishop onto b7. And now Brian played another very strange move. At this point, you've got to think white should really be playing something like bishop e3 in this position. But no, Brian played b3, which weakens also the protection of the knight on c3. Not one that I would have recommended for white. I just continue developing with bishop to b7. And now Brian plays f5, which, he seems to be mixing a lot of plans up here, but he's trying to obviously weaken the e6 square, or provoke a weakness to get a hole on d5. I now played knight to b4, which sort of hits e4 with the knight and the bishop, I suppose. After knight b4, Brian then played bishop d2, which at least protects the knight. Obviously, the knight was attacked by the queen on c7, so it needed defending. Now I played e5. And obviously, I'm thinking now, my next move is, I think you can probably guess that black is going to be looking to play d5 in the very near future, with the bishop and both knights protecting the d5 square, and the bishop on d2 interfering with the queen's influence on d5. Brian then played rook c1, obviously looking to defend the c pawn if the knight eventually moved. But white's got I've played these positions as white a lot. White has got no coordination, and black, after black plays d5, black is got a very nice position. The engines thinks black is better, but not massively better here, just a little bit better. But yeah, after rook c1, black is just asking for black to play d5 really, and now I think the engines would think black has got a clear advantage in this position. Well, Brian obviously didn't want the pawn to come any further. Brian took on d5, and then we get multiple exchanges on d5. In this position now, the f5 pawn looks a little bit lonely. It doesn't really have anything to help it with its attack. And black's got some very potentially active pieces. White's pieces seem to be sort of not very well coordinated and not really in a position to do anything very threatening. White then played c4, driving the knight away. The knight then really goes back. Knight f4 would also be an option, but knight f6 is absolutely fine as well. Brian then plays bishop c3, looking to attack the e5 square. That, however, is quite a big mistake, because now black plays the very, very strong knight to g4. This is threatening on the surface to fork the queen and rook on e3. But actually, it's not white's biggest problem. Brian didn't see that though, and Brian did kind of look to prevent the fork on e3. But unfortunately now, after e4, uncovering the diagonal of the queen, that h2 square is looking pretty nasty for white. Obviously e4 removes the defence of the h2 square. Brian then plays h3. He's going to try and attack the knight. This position is actually, it's just completely lost. It's actually a forced mate for black. Black then obviously takes on f3. and Brian takes back on g4. The rest of it is quite trivial. F takes g2 is check, so the king then has to move, and then I take the rook and promote to a queen. Brian played on, and he played bishop takes queen, but after bishop c5, check, Brian did indeed resign the position. This is obviously a forced mate. Bishop d4, bishop takes, queen f2, queen g3, bishop g2, bishop takes g2, checkmate. Not a very high level game, but again, I've kind of wanted to look at that game because I like this opening. I want to look at all the kind of possibilities, and it's probably the most memorable game that I played for quite a long time back when I very first started playing chess. The guy I played was higher rated than me, and I must be honest, it did give me a buzz for quite some time, although I appreciate that the quality of the game is not too high. But Black didn't make any major mistakes, and he did take his chance when it arose. So that was my game back in 1995 against Brian Sharp, and hopefully I can bring you another game soon.